Hello, and welcome back to the H-Span podcast, your go-to podcast for longevity policy discussions. I'm your host, Dylan Livingston. In this episode, I had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Matt Kaeberlein, Chief Science Officer at Optispan Ventures and Professor of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at the University of Washington School of Medicine. I have been looking forward to this discussion for quite a while now. His contributions to the longevity and aging movement have been nothing short of remarkable. With over 250 published papers, his work has been tantamount towards the advancement of longevity science understanding. Personally, I wanted to know more about his work with dogs. When talking about man's best friend, it only makes sense for us to want them to enjoy the same long and healthy lives as their less furry counterparts. Us. Here's my discussion with Matt Kaeberlein.
Live long and prosper.
All right. Thank you for joining us, A4LI listeners, to another installation of A4LI's podcast series. My guest today is Matt Kaeberlein, professor of pathology at University of Washington, among many other things. Matt, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Matt Kaeberlein. As Dylan said, I'm a professor of laboratory medicine and pathology at the University of Washington. I've been studying the biology of aging for, going on 25 years now, almost. It's become something that I'm super passionate about, and I'm super excited about where the field's at and where we're going.
Awesome. Me too, and I'm glad that you're excited because when the smart people are excited, that means there's something to actually be excited about. So that's great. So, Matt, I usually start off these podcasts by asking our guests to go back in time and kind of tell us what inspired you 25, 30, 40 years ago, whenever it was for you. What inspired you to kind of do what you're doing? And, you obviously want to make a big impact on the world, right? When did you come to that realization that you wanted to, change the world in a big way?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think I always felt that way. The path to, actually hopefully having a positive impact on the world, I think took a little bit longer in my own mind to clarify. I went to graduate school. So this was 1997 when I started graduate school, not thinking at all about the biology of aging and the field that I ended up, really focusing my career on at that time. I was really, I was trained in mathematics and biochemistry, and I thought I would do something like protein structure and design or X-ray crystallography. But during my first year at MIT and the biology program there, I heard a talk by Lenny Guarente, who I ended up doing my thesis research with, where he talked about how his lab had, started to study aging using molecular biology and biochemistry and genetics. Mm-hmm. And something about that talk just resonated with me. And, I was immediately struck by the complexity of the problem. And I think also struck by the potential implications for human health and well-being if we were eventually successful at tackling this problem of trying to have a real impact on the biology of aging. And, as I learned more about the field, that sort of initial response has only been reinforced. And I'm absolutely a believer that the ability to modulate the biological mechanisms of aging has the potential to have a much larger impact on human health and well-being than just about any other area, certainly of biomedical research that we are studying today or that we have studied in the past. The wider recognition of biology of aging as a scientific discipline is relatively new. When I went to graduate school, when I started graduate school, it was a pretty small, it's still a relatively small community compared to like cancer biology, but it was a really small community then. And so one of the things that I've seen, just in the time that I've been working in the field, is many more young people are coming into the field knowing that's what they want to work on, right? Because they've heard about the science of aging. And, regardless of how you feel like about some of the more extreme personalities in the field, like Aubrey de Grey, Aubrey has brought a lot of people into the field because that's how they first get exposed to this idea of the science of aging.
And so that was the first person who brought me into the field, right?
Yeah. So I think I view that. Again, I disagree with Aubrey in about some of the things that he says and timelines, but it's been really, I think, a positive thing. And I feel very good about the fact that the field has gotten to the point where young people are coming in, recognizing the importance of this problem, and they are extremely motivated sometimes from the time they graduate high school to make an impact. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, not for nothing. We just brought on a part-time, IT person, and he was is a 19-year-old kid who, just graduated high school and said, "Hey, I want to get involved with the longevity field. I have these IT skills." And we're bringing him on because, at this point also, it's still a small enough field where there's really is room for everybody at this point. There are, what I do in my spare time, when I'm not doing this political stuff, is try to bring new players into the field, right? So I think there's still a lot of room to grow, right? But definitely, there are a lot of, you and I have been at similar conferences in the past few months. I see a lot of young faces there, a lot of young excited academics getting involved. So yeah, it's a good time to be in longevity biotech. It's definitely on the upswing. And I don't see how anybody, if you're exposed to the aging research field, how anybody could want to go back to anything like cancer or Alzheimer's research, because it's just the impact of aging research is just so obviously clear, right? It's just so obviously, bigger than one of these siloed diseases that these, biomedicine has been targeting. So
I think you're right. The one thing I would say is I think, historically, part of the reason why people sometimes did go, if you want to say back, maybe shifted their research programs towards, cancer or heart disease, even if they understood the biology of aging, or that's where they came from, was because of funding, right? That's what you had to do to get your research program funded. Exactly. One of the things that makes me extremely optimistic about the future of geroscience or aging biology is I think that's going to change. I think that there are now sufficient resources being mobilized for this problem. And it's the first time in human history that's been the case, that the people who are in the field now aren't going to be forced to make that choice, that there will be resources to study the biology of aging. And in fact, I think the field will grow rapidly over the next 5 to 10 years because of that influx of resources coming into the field, both on the basic research side and in the longevity biotech space.
Right. Absolutely. The Altos Lab announcement, right? That's a huge deal. The Evolution, the Evolution Foundation, like there are funds for, there are funds available, right, for this kind of stuff now. You don't need to kind of sugarcoat it.
Just to put it in perspective, if Evolution actually deploys the funds that they have committed, that's going to be about 3 times the United States federal budget for biology of aging research, right? So this is now, this is a real game changer. So I think we're all, waiting to see, but very, very optimistic that things are going to change for the better in terms of the ability to actually start to do some of the initiatives that we've all been wanting to do for a while.
Well, not for nothing, Matt. I didn't plan on talking about this, but not for nothing. This is I didn't plan on talking about this yet, but I guess we'll just get into it. Not for nothing. When we go to these A4LI, when we go to these political offices, one of the things we highlight is the Evolution Foundation and how the Saudi government is committing, like you said, 3 times more than we are to this issue.
Yeah.
And what are they? I mean, GDP wise, I could look it up right now, but I think they're probably like a 30th of the size of us, maybe.
Yeah.
A 50th. Like, I don't know what the
Yeah.
number is, but the ratio is definitely off. If we wanted to invest in, we really should, if the Saudis government is investing $1 billion, the U.S. government should be investing like $40 billion, like $30 billion. If we're going to scale that.
Obviously, I agree. I think there are lots of reasons which we don't have time to get into why that hasn't happened yet, and why it's still a little bit of an uphill battle at the U.S.
Sure.
Federal funding level. But I think one thing I would say in general is so Hevolution, as you know, but just for your audience, is a nonprofit foundation. Most of the money comes from the Saudi government, regardless of how you feel about the Saudi government. That's just a fact. We're not going to get into that aspect of it. But one thing they are doing, or at least they have said they are going to do, is distribute that money worldwide. So it's not as if all of that research is being put into infrastructure within their own nation, right? And I think that's commendable. Again, regardless of how you feel about anything else about where the money comes from, I think that's commendable. The other thing that I have noticed is there is absolutely an outsized enthusiasm and increase in research funding from governmental sources for aging biology and geroscience internationally. European countries in particular, Asian countries in particular, are ahead of the United States in recognizing the importance of this problem and acting on it. And you could make that argument in some ways about scientific research funding in general, but I think particularly in this space, we run the risk in the United States of falling behind if we don't get our game together and actually start to put some more resources towards this problem.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we started A4LI this year. That's why it's been something that I've been pounding on the doors of every politician's office I can, right? So it's it's definitely an uphill battle, but I think there actually has been some positive action in the direction of the field so far. I mean, I think this past appropriations bill was the first time geroscience was mentioned at all. Right. There was no funding mentioned for it, but I think that's kind of the point of what we're trying to do with the caucus, which we're very, very close to getting together, and we'll have announced by the end of this year. But that's the point of the caucus, right? We're setting up a group of politicians who are actually going to now advocate to the appropriations committee to double, triple, quadruple the budget of the NIA division of aging biology, right? So that's kind of what we're up to. And I think like you said, there's countries all over the world. It's not just the Saudi Arabian government and Hevolution. It's the UK with their UK all party parliamentary group. It's a tongue twister there. But they did that in 2019, and they have a national lifespan goal and all this stuff, and that's commendable as well. And Singapore, I'm thinking of Japan, and all those Asian countries have a demographic crisis, right? So they have to focus on this longevity field. So there's examples all around the world, and that's why I'm pretty confident that the U.S. will in the next year really kick it into gear, right? And I think examples of countries around the world funding it more will entice the U.S. to make this a bit of a competition, right? I think there's nothing wrong with a healthy competition, especially in an area like this, right? And especially in an area where everybody's going to end up benefiting in the long run. Yeah. So
agreed.
This is a great conversation, Matt. I didn't even get to talk to you about some of the things that you're up to. So let's talk about what you're up to. Like specifically. You came out in the last year as the chief science officer of Optispan, right? Right. So I'd like you to kind of go into detail on what you're doing there, and then also we'll discuss what you're doing with the dog aging project, because I find that absolutely fascinating, and I have some anecdotal evidence that rapamycin works in dogs. So
I've got a lot of anecdotal evidence about rapamycin, so it's super interesting molecule and conversation topic. So Optispan. I mean, I'm trying to think about what I can say. So I'm going to have to be a little bit careful. But so first of all, I think there's a couple things to say about that. One is that I am in fact transitioning out of academia to the private sector. I have taken on this role as chief science officer at Optispan. And we can talk about the reasons for that. Like, I'm not anti-academia. I'm very appreciative of my experiences in academia. This was just the right move for me at this moment in time. But I do also think academia has some real problems. And so I think if you want to talk about that, I'm happy to do that. But Optispan, the mission of Optispan really is optimal health spans for everyone. That's where the word comes from. And our goal is to bring science-based longevity medicine to as many people as possible. And that's a big goal. There are lots of challenges that go along with that. And specifically how you get there, I think is something that we're working on. One of the pieces of Optispan is in fact creating the toolkit that will allow providers to practice science-based longevity medicine and bring it to their patients. And, I think a lot of people in the field and, people who are around the field talk about the possibility that, real advances in geroscience are only going to be for billionaires. And I think it's important that that's not the case. I don't think it will be, but I think we need to have organizations that are really starting to think about how we make sure that advances in this area are available to, again, optimally anybody who wants to take advantage of them. That sounds naive, Absolutely. And I recognize that that's probably never going to happen. But if you don't shoot for that, you're not going to get anywhere close to it. So that Absolutely. Is really our mission at Optispan, is to make these advances as widely available as possible. Also to recognize that, we are really at the very, very early stages of implementing longevity medicine in a meaningful way for human beings. Most of what's out there is speculative. Actually, I would frame that even a little bit more strongly. Most of what's out there is speculative to snake oil. And so how do you help people differentiate between what's speculative, but probably works or might work or will work for some people, and what's just pure garbage? And so that's also part of our mission, is to help with that process. And some of that may be directly to the general public, but we really believe that medical practitioners play a critical role in this transition. And so that's where we're focusing a lot of our attention, is on helping to educate the medical practitioners and giving them the tools that they need to be able to treat their patients using science-based longevity medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the goal of everybody in the field, right? I think that's kind of what makes longevity special. It's a very selfless field, and I don't think anybody sets out to make longevity medicine just for billionaires, right? I think that's I mean, it seems like that might be a feasible future, right? Because these seem to be experimental and potentially expensive therapeutics, right? But I rapamycin and metformin and all these drugs that are widely available are cents on the dollar for a dose, right? I mean, that's the exciting part. There are so many therapeutics. So sorry. What were you going to say there?
I think you're absolutely right about that. I mean, both what you said, that nobody sets out. Well, very few people set out with the goal of making it only for the wealthy and famous, and that we have some interventions now. In fact, you could argue the sort of best evidenced interventions now that are not particularly expensive or only for wealthy people. But there are a lot of, so there's two things I would say about that. One is, even if nobody sets out for these discoveries to benefit the wealthy, if nobody actively tries to make sure that that's not what happens,
Sure.
there's a chance that that's what's going to happen. So that's number one that I would say. The other is there are many, and I'm not, this is not coming from sort of a conspiracy theory perspective, but there are many structural and cultural and regulatory factors that prevent some of these interventions that could be widely beneficial for a large number of people from actually ever being implemented. And I would put things like rapamycin in that category. And I would even say you can look at things like, nutrition, right? And so why is it that, number one, our nutritional guidelines are incorrect, I think is a nice way of saying it. The recommendations that many people that are made to the general public are not in line with what we know is best practice for optimal health span.
Right.
So not only are the recommendations problematic, but the implementation, you can't walk down a block in a major city and not be bombarded with nutritional choices that are going to be detrimental to your health span. And so again, I'm not saying that there's any sort of attempt to make it that way, but I think there are these structural challenges that disproportionately seem to affect people in the middle class and lower end of the economic spectrum that make it hard for them to achieve optimal health spans. And so I'm thinking about that and how do we navigate that? What are some strategies that might be possible to implement? I think is important.
Sure. Well, I something that I find interesting is, this longevity movement is not going to just run in place, right? The ag tech movement and the AI movement and the, all these other different, futuristic movements are going to be kind of, picking up in their own way, right? So, I think, I hope I see a lot of, ads for, cheap nutrition-based meals that you can order online. I think that, it's going to actually, hopefully, get easier to be eating healthy, right, for people, right? And but I do agree there are some major structural issues. I feel, I remember as a kid, I was not a fan of Michelle Obama's nutrition, crusade, but
right.
but now, thinking about it, maybe she was right, so. But yeah, so no, I totally agree with you. I mean, and that's the other thing. Longevity is not just, it's not just, taking, drugs or therapeutics or whatever it may be to live longer, right? It's also about exercise and socializing and maintaining healthy relations. The longevity dividend, right, talks about all the 4 different factors: environmental, societal, I forget, medical, and economic, I think, or the 4. I'm blanking on the other. But yeah, the point is, it's this longevity approach can't just be about, in A4LI's instance, it has to be about the drug development and regulatory changes and all that
and
stuff,
those are
because no one's
important,
advocating.
right? Don't get me
it.
wrong. I think
Right.
these things have to happen in concert in order to achieve the goals that we all want to achieve.
Right.
But I think they also all need to happen. And the way I think about it is, I think for most people, there's a little bit of a disconnect between the people who are already in this field and the people who, then the vast majority of the general public who don't know much about the science or the field as a whole. But I think it's important to recognize that these sort of next level interventions, the interventions that hopefully will be coming down the pipeline soon, I think it's an open question whether or not those are going to be beneficial if you don't get your sort of basics in order first, right? And what I mean by that is if you've got if you're obese and you have diabetes and you're sedentary, it's not clear to me that something like rapamycin or metformin, well, metformin's a different thing because it will help you if you have diabetes, right? But even these sort of first level interventions are going to do anything in that context. And, I don't know where the future's going, but the second generation interventions may be the same way. And so I feel like these things we have to talk about these things in parallel. You kind of have to get your house in order probably before you're going to be able to benefit from the newer interventions that are coming down the pipeline. I could be wrong about that, but that's I think it's at least a possibility that we should be aware of and considering
Sure.
as we move forward down this path.
Sure. I mean, my thought is that, like something like rapamycin being widely, I mean, maybe like you said, rapamycin. Well, so let me ask you, why do you believe that? Actually, I want to go back. So rapamycin wouldn't work on a sedentary person who is obese. It wouldn't,
I don't know that that's the case, right? So again,
Okay,
this is
okay,
speculation, right? Because we
okay.
don't actually know that it's going to work for anybody, right? I mean, I think
Right. Fair
again,
enough.
this is where we have to be honest with the state of the science. Like I know a lot more about rapamycin than almost anybody else out there. And I'm pretty convinced that for a significant fraction of the population that they could derive some benefit from, some dosing strategy with rapamycin. I believe that's probably true. But I also believe that if you are coming from a particularly unhealthy baseline in terms of lifestyle, you're less likely to get the same benefits. And I don't know whether you would get any benefits. And maybe one way to think about it is, if your lifestyle is predisposing you to a bunch of different pathologies, some of those may be because you're directly impacting the biology of aging, and rapamycin might be effective there. But not everything is going to be because you have accelerated, what we think of as the biology of aging.
Right.
And it only takes one thing to kill you, right? So I say this sort of tongue in cheek often, but it's true, right? If you want to live an optimal sort of longevity lifestyle, you can't die. That's the rule number one. You got to stay alive. And so you have to make sure that whatever you're doing, isn't going to kill you. And I worry that, some of these, some people who have, well, I was going to say really poor lifestyles, but unfortunately this is becoming the sort of typical lifestyle, at least in the United States. That's not all about accelerating the biology of aging. And like I said, it only takes one lethal event to kill you, and interventions that target the biology of aging aren't going to help things outside of that biology. And so again, this is speculation, but I think there's at least a reasonable likelihood that that's the case. And so my feeling is, the strategy should be get your lifestyle at least somewhat in order first before you start worrying about, or in parallel with worrying about, things like rapamycin, metformin, maybe. Metformin again is complicated. Supplements. The supplements are really a place where I don't see. I don't understand these people who think that they can take a stack of supplements and it's going to make up for a crappy lifestyle. Like that's just silly. It's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, supplements are supplements. They're supposed to supplement a healthy lifestyle, not, be, a substitute for a healthy lifestyle. Right. But, I mean, I think there's also, I mean, I hope one day that there's a drug effective enough to, kind of help everybody, right? And I think that's the goal of, a lot of the drug developers, right? I think, we want to make drugs that, at least for me, because there are so many people who are doomed already, right? Or who are already who are not even doomed yet, who are 20, 30 years old, who are not health conscious and never will be, and, are going to be unhealthy people at 40 and 50, right? And so, and it, it's not necessarily even their fault. It's just how, like you said, structurally the world works. So,
can I comment on that though? Because I think there's a few things to unpack there. I agree with you. I also am hopeful that we could have therapies that would offset or counterbalance negative lifestyle factors. And I mean, you could make an argument that we do have some of those, right? Statins maybe are an example for some people. But I would also say, I think the deck is stacked against really effective therapies that can do that for a couple of reasons. I think that there is a systematic problem with the regulatory structure as it exists today, that it is difficult to move forward with a therapy that will improve health outcomes in people who are not diseased, right? So if you try to do a clinical trial in somebody who does not have a disease, the deck is stacked against you from an FDA perspective. It's just really, really hard because the FDA, and this is my personal view, is skewed way too far towards safety. I mean, obviously safety is important, right? But there needs to be, in my view, some sort of rational evaluation of risk reward. The FDA is skewed so far towards the risk side that it's almost impossible to get a drug developed and approved and through the clinical trial process in people who don't have some sort of life-threatening illness. It's very, very difficult. And the further you move away from that life-threatening illness category, the harder it gets. So the deck is stacked against any company trying to develop a drug for that indication. And that's a real problem for geroscience clinical trials. I mean, this is one of the things that we're struggling with right now. And as an example, I use exercise. I think this is to me, this really is clear cut. If you had a pill that gave you all the benefits of exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
In an unhealthy person, they don't have to exercise. They take this pill, they get all the benefits of exercise. But that pill had exactly the same side effect profile as exercise. You wouldn't get past a phase 1 trial with FDA. You wouldn't. Because the side effect profile is worse than rapamycin, right? I mean, it's terrible.
Well,
think about all the side effects associated with exercise.
Fatigue and soreness and
and some people die, right? Some people go out and ride their bike and get hit by a bus. That would be considered a severe adverse event in any clinical trial, right? So there's just no way that I see that you're going to get unless somebody discovers a miracle pill that has no side effects and gives you all the benefits, that you're going to get something like an exercise pill approved. I think it's just too heavy of a lift, given how the drug regulatory agency is skewed towards risk avoidance. That's my personal view.
Sure, but I mean, that's the point of us advocates, right? We, are supposed to be, the ones trying to make change in the regulatory body, the ones who are trying to push for, a more reasonable. This is actually, and I think 3 out of the 4 conferences I've been to, this was one of the discussion topics. But the risk reward ratio is completely off, like you said. Yeah, and it's been something that's I think been discussed by many people.
And I would add to that, I think it goes beyond the regulatory agencies, at least the federal regulatory agencies. This is true at every level, right? I think even if you have physicians who want to prescribe some of these, let's just use rapamycin again as an example,
mm-hmm.
Who want to prescribe rapamycin for their patients, they have to deal with the risk that they're taking on by doing that, right? So there are licensing boards at the local level, at the state level, who, if they start prescribing something like rapamycin, which is a little bit edgy, right, that they might have to deal with pushback or even reprisals from those boards. Or, let's just say, because older people get sick, right, and they die. A physician prescribes rapamycin, somebody could still get sick. It's not an immortality drug, but what if that patient then decides to sue the physician, right? Because this is, it's a little bit experimental. So again, I don't know what the right place to come down on this is. All I'm saying is pointing out that there are structural challenges to moving forward with those kinds of evaluations of potential interventions that could have a real positive impact. And I think it's just something we need to talk about more, right? There isn't a lot of conversation around this area of off-label use of medications because they might have longevity or health span benefits. And, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Right.
How do we navigate that? It's happening, right? There are more people doing this, but we aren't having a lot of real productive conversations about that. And how do we get data from that? And how do we, how do physicians navigate the risks that go along with doing that? In Washington State, we have a right to try law, which at least allows patients to take it into their own hands to some extent, and gives physicians flexibility to do things like that. But not every state has that. So, it's complicated. These are really complicated issues. And I think it's important that we have more conversations along these lines and try to see both sides. And, I probably came off as a little bit too harsh on FDA. Like, I don't blame the people at FDA. And again, that's just my opinion on where the appropriate risk reward should be. But I do believe that there is a culture of risk avoidance at
Yes,
FDA
absolutely.
that has grown up and that has skewed things, in my view, again, too far to one side. But if we don't talk about it, nothing's ever going to change.
Absolutely. Well, I think also, it's still very early to me. I mean, you've been in this field obviously, longer than I have by a good amount, but it seems to me that, just looking back at the history, it's still very early, and I feel like we're not even at the upswing of the exponential growth chart yet here.
Yeah. We're at the hockey stick moment, as my mentor Dave Saby likes to say.
Yeah,
we're just hitting that I think, where we're just hitting that sort of shift in trajectory.
We're close, though. I think we're close. I think we're pretty close. And like you said, I personally don't blame FDA, because all of this, like you said, most of this, until recently, all of it until recently has been speculative, right? It's all been very speculative. There's been really no human human trials of any sort of longevity drugs, right? And then now there are. The more evidence, the more companies, the more pipelines, the more drugs developed, the more the FDA is going to have to eventually come to the realization that there needs to be a shift in the not only the risk reward ratio, right, but also like just what the priority of medicine needs to be, right? The aging is very preventative, and I feel like there's a lot of talk about preventative medicine, like the preventative medicine community doesn't talk about aging, and the aging community doesn't really talk about preventative medicine as much as they should, but they're one and the same, right? And they should be the kind of the same community, and they probably are to some extent. Maybe I'm not seeing the whole picture, but
yeah, I think you're right, but I think that is changing, and I again, to just I think echo what you're saying is it's early. And
yes,
things will change, but I do think it's important to be aware of sort of macro forces and macro trends that I think will push back against that change. And I'm not honestly sure that the big pharmaceutical companies want the system to change. Like, I think that I think the way that FDA is set up now benefits a lot of people and organizations with a lot of power, and favors the development of blockbuster billion-dollar drugs that have incremental effects.
Right.
There's I think that can't be argued. Like, that is the case, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
So will there be pushback against a paradigm shift towards maybe interventions that are more than incremental, right? That can actually have large effects on health span in people. I certainly wouldn't imply like big pharma bad, right? I mean, I think there are good people at these pharmaceutical companies who also want to change the world. But I also believe that the sort of the structures that are in place favor the
absolutely
development and moving forward with drugs that they believe they can get through clinical trials as currently structured. And those are the drugs that first of all, the endpoints are going to be disease focused, at least for now,
right,
and typically have small effect sizes, right? I think that is just the way that FDA clinical trials are structured. You very rarely do you see drugs moved forward that could really change the game for a lot of these disorders. They're pretty small effects, but that's all you need. Really, what you need to get a drug approved is a tiny effect that reaches statistical significance or almost reaches statistical significance, and where the side effect profile is acceptable by FDA standards, because it's really the safety that is the driver of approval of these drugs. And the benefit can be zero to small, and you can still get your drug approved if it falls within the acceptable safety profile. And so that tends to favor incremental benefits.
So let me ask you something though. So the current state of longevity companies, from the way I think most people see it, is you pick an indication, cancer, Alzheimer's, whatever it is, and then you develop your drug that targets one of the 9 hallmarks. and then it goes through developments,
Yeah.
right? But so how do you feel about that setup? Do you think do you think, like, basically what I'm asking is, do you think the FDA needs to, declare aging a disease in order for this field to really be, able to move forward properly, or can we kind
Right.
of, function in the system that we have here? Because it seems, I mean, it hasn't deterred companies from, popping into existence. It hasn't deterred, massive investments, right? So but it has deterred institutional investors, right? And I feel like the companies that end up raising hundreds of millions of dollars are the ones that kind of tweak their language to try to fit under the kind of guidelines of going after these different diseases, right? And then having the off-label effect of
Right.
aging after, right?
Right.
So just what do you think about this whole system? Do you think it's feasible to keep going?
So a couple things I would say. One is, I think for now, unless you are one of these companies like Altos that gets a huge influx of investment, right, that gives you a long runway and allows you to do things by a different model, Calico is another example. I think you sort of have to take that approach where from the very beginning, your mindset is to, how do we get FDA approval? And that immediately constrains you to a certain sort of cookie cutter mentality. And I don't mean that in a, like, I'm not trying to be critical, but it's true. You have to sort of follow the path that exists in order to get there because of the way that the whole system is set up. So I think it's what you have to do. So I think that's what companies do. Now, so let's just say this is I think an interesting, this question of aging as a disease, and I think there's a lot of misperceptions out there about this, in the sense that a lot of people say, well, if FDA would just recognize aging as a disease, all our problems would be taken care of. And right. I think that's just a fundamental lack of understanding about how FDA operates. Okay, let's just say I'm now the czar of FDA and I decide aging is a disease. Go do your clinical trials. What are you going to measure? You tell me, right. What are you going to measure?
No, I know that's what I tell
right.
All the time.
So what's the endpoint? Lifespan? Right. You're going to do a lifespan study in healthy people? Okay, come back to me 20 years from now when you know the answer. So I don't think this helps much, if at all. I think what FDA wants is, they want quantitative endpoints that are going to tell us something about quality or quantity of life for your patient population. Absolutely. And they want to know that it's safe. Absolutely. And the magnitude of effect can be tiny as long as you fall within acceptable boundaries for safety. And that's a little bit nebulous, because what's acceptable for safety is going to depend on the severity of the condition. But that will be defined as you go through the conversation process with FDA. So what can we measure that's quantitative, that tells us something about quality or quantity of life within the framework of geroscience, right? Mm-hmm. So you have the choice. You can go to sick people who already have some age-related disease and either try to modify their disease course, or, like in the context of TAME, use multiple endpoints, composite endpoints, right, to increase your statistical power and show that you can delay the onset of one of multiple age-related diseases or functional declines. Right. So that's one model. The other model is to start in a healthy or age-appropriate health status population and show that you can either delay the decline, which is hard but possible depending on what your endpoint is, or reverse the decline. And that's where I think the actual opportunities are. We now know that certain interventions can reverse functional declines that go along with aging, so you can actually see things get better. There, I think you have the opportunity. This is the one place where I see potentially an opportunity for something that's more than incremental in the current FDA framework. Because if you can show that somebody who's had a significant decline in heart function, or, even something as relatively benign in a sense as periodontal disease, if you can show that you've made it better, there you have an opportunity to get approval and something that actually moves the needle in terms of health outcomes. So that's where I would think about. But whether we call aging a disease or not, and whether FDA does, I don't think matters from the clinical trial perspective. It may matter from a sort of cultural framework and how people think about geroscience. I don't think it has much of an impact on FDA and clinical trials.
Right, absolutely. Well, a few thoughts. The first thought is, from a PR standpoint, which is something that I kind of think about. Aging as a disease has its issues, right? You're calling people over 65 disease just
Yeah,
for
it
being alive.
offends a significant fraction of people.
It,
Yeah,
it
I think
offends
that's right.
me. It offends me. It's I plan to be healthy over 65, but I'm going to be diseased then. It is a little rude and kind of, I don't know, I don't like it. So, they're kind of like the social problems of it, right? But I agree with you, like, I'm sure you were at a lot of the same conferences I was. You've heard, half the talks are about, these aging clocks these days, right? And using the clocks as kind of the ultimate biomarker for aging trials, right? And so, what do you think about the clock situation? There's a ton of different organizations now working on it. So do you think that's kind of going to be a solution to aging as a disease in clinical trials? Do you think that'll ever be?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. So here's, I think, where I would say I can't predict the future, obviously. And I'm not sure I know enough about the inner workings at the regulatory bodies to really be able to make a strong prediction on this. So I think there's two things, right? One is the aging clocks themselves, which I would just use the more generic term biomarker. Really, clock is just the latest iteration of biomarkers of aging, right?
It seems like the clock is like is like what Nir Barzilai is doing, and it's like a multitude of different biomarkers, right? Yeah,
right.
Compiled into one. Yeah, yeah.
So here's what I would say. I think that I'm very encouraged at the progression in development of clocks and development of biomarkers. I think the hype has gotten way ahead of the actual science. I am frustrated by the epigenetic clock people who equate epigenetic biomarkers with aging biology, as if they're, you move one and you've affected everything about aging. But in general, I am encouraged by the development of these biological aging clocks that take into account multiple aspects or multiple dimensions of aging, and seem to be very predictive for certainly chronological age, and in many cases for future health outcomes, at least in sort of retrospective sorts of analyses. So I'm very encouraged at how far we've come, and I think we're getting close to really being able to have biomarkers of biological aging that are sensitive to intervention. There's a couple things that I would say about that, though. One is all of these biological aging clocks are built on what we currently know about the biology of aging, which is incomplete. And so I want to be careful that we don't get comfortable with the idea that we figured it out. And the reason why I think that's important is, let's say we get to a point where there's consensus in the field that this set of biomarkers is very predictive for intervention discovery, whether or not an intervention is going to impact health span and lifespan. As soon as we do that, and that's what everybody's using, we immediately lose the ability to find interventions that are outside of what we currently understand about aging biology. So I want to be careful of that, because I think there's more we don't understand than we do understand. And if we ever want to do better than caloric restriction, we really better start paying attention to what we don't understand. So that's number one. The other thing that I think is that I have less certainty about is, what's the path to a regulatory body like FDA allowing these biological aging clocks or biomarkers of aging as a surrogate endpoint for a clinical trial? My perception is it's a long path based on, historical surrogate endpoints. The people at FDA really have to feel confident that that surrogate endpoint is telling you something fundamental about the disease. Now, they can still be wrong. You could make the case that the amyloid beta surrogate endpoint for Alzheimer's disease, that they got it wrong. But even still, they have to be comfortable and confident that those are reflecting the underlying biology and are predictive of future health outcomes, quality, quantity of life. So I don't know what the path looks like there. And I think there are many factors that could come into play, including some of the things that you and others are working on, which is changing the political landscape around the regulatory bodies, right? So I think it's hard to predict how how that's going to evolve. I think it will happen eventually. Eventually, we will have surrogate biomarkers that are useful for clinical trials. I'm just not, I think it's going to be, my guess is 10 years, but that's a total guess.
Yep. Yeah. Everything's a guess. It could be tomorrow. It could be in 100 years. Who knows, right?
Yeah. Well, God, let's hope not 100 years.
Yeah.
But yeah,
well,
that's right.
I, like many of our audience, much of our audience, many of our listeners, have dogs, have doggos, and we love our dogs, and they're the best things in our lives. Some, for a lot of us, I know I love my dog more than I love most humans, to be honest. So I think most people would agree. We all want to see our dogs live longer. I'm looking at your picture right now, and it's you with a bunch of dogs.
Puppies.
So yeah, very cute, very cute. So
there's almost no feeling that compares with being mauled by about 6 puppies who all want to lick you. Sort of an amazing experience.
I have 2 dogs, and when they were both puppies, it was quite an experience getting mauled by them. I can't imagine that times 3. That would be an overload. But so I mentioned earlier, I have anecdotal evidence. I have a friend who gave his dog starting at age 10, rapamycin, I think on a schedule of 1 milligram a day every other day. And or maybe 1 milligram, I think was what it was. And the dog was active and healthy until I believe 14.
Yeah,
that's a pretty long life. I've had multiple dogs in my life, and none of them have lived to 14. I know you said earlier you have a lot of anecdotal evidence too. I'm sure you have some actual, real world evidence too. So can you talk about the dog aging project? Why you're targeting dogs? I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but maybe you could spell it out for us.
Sure.
Go
ahead.
No, please, please, jump into it.
Okay. So I think the first thing that I have to say, right, is I need to be very careful that I don't do anything that would cause people to believe that I'm recommending that they give rapamycin to their dogs. I think, it's important that we do this clinical trial because we don't know for sure that rapamycin is going to be beneficial for dogs or people. And the whole point of doing the clinical trial is to actually get the data. So I just want to put that out there that, I've had people email me and tell me about their experiences. And I know lots of people who are taking rapamycin off label. I've done it myself. I personally believe that rapamycin can have beneficial effects for many people and probably for some dogs as well. But I also want to say that, we don't fully know what the risk profile is, and we don't know quantitatively that there is going to be significant benefits for lifespan and health span. So I think it's important just to recognize the difference between sort of anecdotal data. My friend gave rapamycin to their dog and their dog lived to be 14 years old. Between, clinical trial data that's controlled and you can have some confidence in. So I just want to put that out there as sort of a general disclaimer.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So the dog aging project, I think, we're about 5 years into the large NIH grant that has funded most of the dog aging project. This is really a project that started about 10 years ago. Around 2013 is when I really first started thinking hard about, this idea. And for me, it really sprang from a series of conversations that I had with Daniel Promislow, who's the co-director of the Dog Aging Project. We were both the co-directors of a summer course on aging biology at Woods Hole for a couple of years. And it was conversations we had there that sort of solidified this in my mind. And, it's funny because looking back on it, it seems so obvious, but I had never really thought about, I'd been studying aging biology and interventions that could extend lifespan, caloric restriction, 50% increase in lifespan, rapamycin, 25% increase in lifespan. I knew about all this stuff in laboratory animals, but I'd never made the connection that my dogs, and I've had dogs my entire life, are aging 7 to 10 times faster than we are biologically, right? I mean, that's clear. So the same interventions probably will work in dogs. We have to do the experiment to find out, but probably they'll work in dogs. And given that dogs age 7 to 10 times faster than people do, we can know the answer in a reasonable time frame. So I remember I was at Woods Hole and I just sit down on the back of the envelope, figure out, so how long would it take us to do a clinical trial in dogs to find out whether rapamycin works or not. And the answer was somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And I was like, wow, that's actually doable, right? That's something we can do in the time frame of an NIH grant, right? So I started at that point really, trying to convince other people that this was a good idea. And I think a lot of people got it conceptually pretty quickly, but thought it was crazy. Like there's just no way you can actually do this. And so it took 5 years to actually be able to get a decent sized grant to be able to do this clinical trial. And really, we were only able to do that because we paired I was only able to do that because I know Daniel and Katie and the other people were really wanted to do this longitudinal study. The only way I was able to get the clinical trial funded was we packaged it in the context of this much larger longitudinal study of aging, which is important. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm a big believer in the longitudinal study of aging in dogs. Ultimately, that probably will lead to discoveries that transcend and are more important than the rapamycin clinical trial. But the only way I could get a grant to do the rapamycin clinical trial was to package it in the framework of this large longitudinal study of aging. So that's what we did. We have put together a longitudinal study of aging, which now has more than 41,000 dogs. Most of those dogs are not in a clinical trial. We are following those dogs over time to try to understand what are the most important genetic and environmental factors that influence healthy aging in companion dogs. Why dogs? I think we talked about how rapidly they age, so you can do it in a reasonable time frame. There are lots of reasons people love their dogs. About half the people in the United States, maybe more, consider their dog to be part of their family, right? So if we can, and this gets to the sort of educating the public about geroscience. If we can convince a significant fraction of the general public that we can actually increase health span and lifespan in a family member, and they can see it, right, by targeting the biology of aging, that's a big inroad into educating the general public about geroscience, I believe. So people consider their pets to be part of their family, and dogs pretty much share the human environment. With the exception of diet, most aspects of the environment our companion dogs share with us. And so it's a way to understand how environmental factors influence aging biology that we can't get from mouse studies. There are other reasons, but I think those are probably the major ones why dogs make sense for this kind of a large longitudinal study of aging. And so, like I said, we got 41,000 dogs plus in the study now. We are an open science project. We've made the first year's data set available so other data scientists can get access to it, analyze it. We're now publishing papers, found some interesting things. So we've published papers on meal frequency and age-related health outcomes, exercise and age-related health outcomes, cancer incidence and different genetic backgrounds. So I think we're just at the stage now, just in the last year, all those papers have come out where we're really starting to see the fruits of our labor. And that's all from the cross-sectional data set where we only have one time point for each dog in that data set. Now, every year we update the data on the dogs, and that's where the longitudinal aspect comes in. We'll start to be able to get beyond the simple correlative cross-sectional inferences and hopefully start to get to more, things that are closer to being able to at least suggest causality. And then there's the clinical trial. So the clinical trial is sort of separate. That's a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial of rapamycin. We call it Triad, test of rapamycin in aging dogs. Primary endpoint is lifespan. So, we talked earlier about how do you do a geroscience clinical trial in people? You're not going to do a lifespan trial in healthy people. Right. So, but in dogs, you can. Yeah, because they're aging as rapidly as they are, especially larger dogs, we have enough power. So we have 580 dogs, or we will, in the trial. The dogs have to be at least 7 years old and between 40 and 110 pounds. In that demographic group, in 3 years, we have statistical power to detect a 9% change in lifespan. So we can actually do a lifespan clinical trial. That's the primary endpoint. But of course, we're maybe more interested in health span. So we're looking broadly at as many health span metrics as we can measure
Right.
in this population. And that includes cardiac function, neurological
Mhm.
function, activity, disease incidence, things like that. So, so that's the design of the trial. We are enrolling currently. We've got, I think, maybe almost 100 dogs that have been screened. We have 9 clinical sites. We're expanding that. Hopefully we'll be up above 20 clinical sites by the end of this calendar year. And then throughout next year, we will be finishing up the enrollment into the trial. The dogs are block randomized at each site. The treatment period is 1 year, 2-year follow-up. So once enrollment is complete, then it's a 3-year time frame before we unblind and can answer the question. So, it's not as fast as I would like, but again, it's certainly something that you wouldn't be able to do in humans. And I'm hopeful 3.5 years from now, 4 years from now, we'll know the answer.
Yeah, 3.5, 4 years now. I mean, I remember 3.5, 4 years ago, and that was not too long ago. So, that's not too long from now, especially, it's interesting. You talked about, you're looking at, health span indicators as well, right? And I think that's, that again, anecdotal evidence. Everybody don't, take this, I'm not a doctor here, but one of the key things that my friend mentioned to me about the rapamycin and his dog was that she was happy and healthy and going for walks every day up until her last few days, and it was really about it was really it was like her what is it, compression of morbidity, right? The period of time she lived in bad health was really minimized, and she lived a longer life than most dogs, but also a healthier life. I mean, 13 years in good health running around is, and not for nothing, he has another dog who's now 12 and still doing the same thing and has been on rapamycin for longer. So and then now he's got a third dog who he started giving rapamycin to as a 4-year-old. So I think he's just using his dogs as test subjects at this point. But I'll let you know, Matt.
I can't condone that kind of behavior. That's all I can say. But I do think it'll be interesting, right? I mean, I think we should be able to tell if there is a compression of morbidity in the clinical trial population. Sure. The one thing I can say is, so we've done 2 safety trials. One was a 10-week treatment. One was a 6-month treatment. And in both of those trials, the owners self-reported increased activity in the dogs that got rapamycin, and they were blinded. So, again, they're small studies, short term, but the fact that in both of them, that was self-reported by the owners who didn't know which, whether their dog was getting rapamycin or placebo, makes me believe that there probably is something there, at least over the short term, in terms of a perceived activity of your dog.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I have 2 doggos at home, and they're I think both 6. So hopefully in 3 to 4 years we'll know. So we, if it's the right answer, we can start getting my doggos on their rapamycin. Yeah. But awesome, good stuff. So I'm just looking now. We have 5 minutes left here, Matt. So I just want to ask you, a question that I ask everybody to kind of end off the podcast. So I feel like most people in this field are optimists, right? I feel like we, get into this field because we see the good in humanity. Why do you think our audience should be optimistic about the future? You can talk about, longevity as being a reason. You can talk about other fields, but what's your outlook on humanity, 10, 20, 30 years down the road?
Yeah. So I think you're right. I mean, I definitely would put myself in the optimist in general category. So why should we be optimistic about the future? Well, I mean, I think one way to think about it is, what's the alternative? If you're not optimistic, you can be miserable, but why would you want to do that? I think it's certainly easy to look around the world and focus on all of the things that aren't working the way that we want them to. Right. I guess what I would say is, certainly within this field, there's no question that we should be optimistic. Like we've talked about, I feel like we are at sort of a hockey stick moment where the trajectory of the pace of discovery in this field is going to increase dramatically, and we have an opportunity to really have large impacts on well-being for lots and lots of people. So I'm optimistic about the field for sure. And when you put it in the broader picture, I think, the pace of technology is increasing. And I think the world is going to change unquestionably in ways that we can't predict. But I would also say that if you look back through human history, in general, the trajectory has been towards better quality of life for more people. And I am optimistic that that trend will continue, and that the human race will be able to avoid the pitfalls that might prevent us from achieving that. And I think, in many ways, I look back and I wish I was coming into this field now as a 25-year-old, right? Because I think that the future, there's so many cool things that are going to happen in the future. And I hope that I will benefit from the discoveries and live to be, 120, 130, maybe even more. But I would love to be coming into the field now, because I think that, there's a lot of really exciting stuff that's going to happen, both in our science and in the sort of evolution of the human race over the next 100 years, as we continue to accelerate the pace of discovery. So I guess it just comes down to curiosity, right? If you're a curious person and you want to see what's going to happen, then I think it's a good time to be alive.
Absolutely. That's one of the main reasons I want to, live as long as possible is, I want to see how humanity looks, as 100 years from now, right? Longer, right? I want to see what, others couldn't in the past, and, see how humanity progresses on a larger scale. And I think that's very, very, very interesting to me. People are interesting. It's worth it.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I would say is, if, and I believe this, and this might be naive, but I've always believed, I think most people at heart want to help other people. I think human beings are pack animals, and we gain happiness from helping other people. And I know it's hard to look around the world sometimes and see that, but I think that's true of most people. And I think that's why I'm optimistic about the future of the human race, because I believe that at heart, most of us are the same. We generally want the same things, and we want to help other people.
We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. You know who said that? It was JFK.
What's that?
That was JFK. I was trying to give it away.
I can hear it now. I can hear
it. Well, on that note, Matt, I agree with you on everything you said. I just want to, I see we're out of time here. So thank you so much for joining. This was, one heck of a conversation. I'm really looking forward to following up with you in the future. Hopefully over time we can, do check-ins, and I think we can get updates on all the different, the dog aging project, and your work at Optispan and everything else. But I'm really glad you joined us, and I'm glad that we have people like you in the longevity industry who are so smart and passionate. So thank you, Matt. If you have anything else you want to say to our audience, please do now, and then we can wrap it up.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, and absolutely looking forward to what's coming down the road. It's going to be fun.
Me too. All right. Well,
thank you again to Dr. Kaeberlein for coming on to our podcast, and thank you to all of you, our listeners, for tuning in. If you have anyone you would like to see make an appearance on our podcast, you can send your suggestions to us at info@a4li.org. We will be back in about 2 weeks with our next podcast installation. As always, let's live long and prosper.